wondering how I got into this mix. Mind playing tricks.
Hey everyone, this is Derrick Broze with Micah Jackson, and today we are talking with somebody that I haven't spoken with since 2015. For those who haven't seen that interview, do reference the Conscious Resistance YouTube channel, February 2015, where I speak with Mr. Paul Roberts about Ukraine, Russia, Kissinger. It was a whole different world at that time 3 years ago. But how are you doing this morning? Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Derrick. I'm looking forward to the interview.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've spoken. As I said, the world has changed. We're under a new administration. We have now a new year. We're going into 2019. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to touch base with you, not only because it's been a couple of years, but we're starting to go into a new year. We have a new, we have not only the Trump administration now in power, but we also have the Democrats coming into office. So there's a lot of changes going on. And as you are well aware, a lot of changes going on domestically and internationally. So we figured we would get into some of that. So let's go ahead and start. We were looking at your website this morning, and I noticed that you recently wrote about the 9/11 news and as it relates to the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry and the possibility of the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York trying to implement a grand jury or something along those lines. Can you share your thoughts on that situation and just some background that you have on that?
Well, what the Lawyers Committee has done is to confront the U.S. Attorney of the Southern District of New York, which is really the most controlled U.S. Attorney in the country, with extraordinary evidence that the official account of 9/11 is a fabrication, and that crimes were committed that have not been investigated. And there is a statute in U.S. law that gives to Americans the ability to present crimes to U.S. attorneys that requires them to convene a grand jury to investigate. So the Lawyers Committee has provided evidence of these crimes, and the U.S. Attorney's Office has said that they will comply with the law. They didn't say they would convene a grand jury, but they did say they would comply with the law, which requires them to do that. But I don't really see how they can. I don't think that a U.S. attorney would be permitted to really investigate it. Now, they may have they may have a fake investigation, or they may call the grand jury and present them with the case in an unconvincing way and get it all dismissed as some kind of anti-American conspiracy theory. Otherwise, it implies, the downfall of very powerful autonomous groups that operate under the cloak of secrecy in the United States government. And I think they're far more powerful than a U.S. attorney. So I don't see how anything can really come of it.
Well, you're giving us a nice and bright and cheery outlook for 2019 as it relates to 9/11 truth, and it's not giving us much to hope for. But I agree with you. I'm joking, of course, but I definitely agree with you. And I think what you're referencing there is, of course, the term that has become very popular in the last couple years, which is the term deep state, which, if I'm being honest, it drives me a little bit crazy because, as I'm sure you're aware, as somebody who's been involved in government, for those who are listening and are unaware, Mr. Roberts is, of course, the former United States Assistant Secretary of the Treasury under President Ronald Reagan. And you have obviously quite a bit of experience where you're not just speaking from ignorance, but speaking from your own experience directly involved with these institutions. And now people are thinking in terms of deep state. They're thinking in terms of embedded government that the shadow government. And that's what I was saying. We used to call this the shadow government, or I guess people would say the New World Order, things like that. Now deep state has become very popular. Your you're pointing, though, to the larger picture, though, is that when it comes to things like 9/11 or even going back to JFK, which you mentioned in your blog here, that people, not only are the masses probably not ready to accept these truths or to even consider them, but that there's so much entrenched power that it's almost, dare I say, impossible to wedge the truth from their hold, their grip.
Well, actually, Derrick, I think that the majority polls now show a majority of people don't believe the official 9/11 story. And
yeah, I would agree with that. The masses are more aware.
Polls show that hardly anyone believes that Oswald killed Kennedy. But the official explanation doesn't change just because the public's view changes. For example, the official explanation of the Israeli attack on the USS Liberty in 1967 still stands, despite all the testimony of all the crew and the Mora Commission convened by Admiral Mora, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Despite all the evidence, which is overwhelming, the official explanation that it was all just some kind of Israeli mistake still stands. So just because people don't believe official explanations doesn't mean they don't remain the official explanation. So I don't really think, and looking at the outcome of the reopening of the Kennedy assassination by the Congress, I think some 13 years after the event, public dissatisfaction with the Warren Commission report was so overwhelming that the Congress had to investigate. They created a committee to investigate, and they modified some of the conclusions. They said, well, clearly there was a conspiracy, and Oswald wasn't the only one, but we don't say or know who the conspirators were, for example. So, and then they revealed, well, what they really did to get the whole thing on the back burner, they revealed the Northwoods Project, which was a plan by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to shoot down American citizens in the streets of Washington, D.C., Miami, to shoot down American airliners, to strafe refugee boats from Cuba and blame Castro so that the U.S. military could invade Cuba and have regime change. This was a top secret document. It was presented to President Kennedy by Lemitzer, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and of course Kennedy rejected it. But the release of that, it was such a sensation at the time, though it's dropped out of view, that it kind of put the Kennedy assassination on the back burner. So something comparable may come out of the 9/11 Lawyers Committee.
So, I mean, what you're saying there is that maybe the public learns the truth, kind of like we've learned with the MLK assassination and obviously the JFK assassination. But at the end of the day, if the people and power, the entrenched power, the official story doesn't change, then it really might not have an effect other than public awareness, and maybe even sometimes the opposite effect that we want. Instead of getting people to get to the streets and be upset or call for change, they just kind of passively accept, yeah, we were lied to, JFK was a lie, 9/11 was a lie, but what are you going to do about it?
Well, you see, the point is they really can't do anything about it. Think about the Kennedy assassination. I personally don't think anyone on the Warren Commission believed what they told the people. They knew that Kennedy had been murdered by the CIA, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Secret Service itself. The evidence was overwhelming. But they couldn't possibly tell the American people during the Cold War, with this competition with the Soviet Union, the Soviet threat, blah, 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 that their president had been killed by their own government, because the confidence in the government would have collapsed. Were they going to actually drag in the top generals and CIA officers and Secret Service people and put them on trial? No, of course not. Nothing like that could happen. And it's the same today. If we've got 20 years of a fake war on terror, it's a hoax. The whole thing is a hoax. We have this Russiagate. We have all this recreation of the Russian threat. It keeps the military security complex in funds. You know, it's $1,000 billion a year is the military security budget. And all kinds of power go with that, all kinds of unaccountability. Now, there's no way that that can be shaken. And so if this grand jury happens and they come up and say, yes, these crimes did happen, we've got to find out who it is and hold them accountable and all of that, it's not conceivable. You're talking about people in the George W. Bush administration, possibly Israeli involvement, CIA involvement. You know, this type of thing is just not going to happen. It would just completely crack any confidence at home or abroad in the American government. And it would undermine all of the propaganda of 20 years, which, you know, the war on terror, this is now imbued into the population. And the Muslim threat, the Russian threat, they're not going to let go of that. It's too much. And so I don't think it can happen. I think that the fact that the U.S. attorney has said that he will comply with the law, what this does, this itself is a major achievement. It gets rid of the notion that the skeptics are conspiracy theorists, because a U.S. attorney would never call a grand jury on the basis of a conspiracy theory. So the U.S. attorney, by saying he will comply with the law, has validated that there's real evidence. So I think it makes it very difficult now to dismiss the scientists, the architects, the engineers, the first responders, the pilots, who all say this is BS, this is hogwash, this 9/11 story is hogwash. It makes it hard now to call all these expert and experienced people conspiracy theorists.
For sure, Dr. Roberts. And I think it's interesting because in the end, you gave us a point of something positive, opening the door maybe to some more people, given these concerns some credibility. As you said, a U.S. attorney wouldn't just open up a case or go to a grand jury on a conspiracy theory. So I guess what we're saying is, in the long run, you know, we might get one more, you know, small battle, small victory for opening up the minds of the people to realize what's going on, not so much changing the government. I thought it was interesting when you spoke. You spoke about you know, this is the most controlled attorney in the country, and you spoke about they won't be permitted. And you know, people, we believe obviously that these things are the case, that they won't be permitted, that things don't happen unless they're approved, but it's also really scary to think, you know, the way we're taught in school, the way we want to believe with the Constitution, Bill of Rights and all of that it's all just permitted and controlled in that manner. And so given that things such as this and the history with the Kennedy assassination that you were bringing up, and how, you know, the official story never changes. And so we get these official stories that, you know, are BS, and you know, we get another generation of people that grow up underneath the official story, and all these official stories, like, for instance, about how bad guns are. It almost seems like there are some things that we should never do in this climate. And one of the things I'm starting to believe more and more so is that we should never give up our guns. You say that to anyone nowadays, and it seems like a lot of people think you're a gun nut, whether you own a gun or not. Just, you know, I think there's a problem with recognition of rights, what they even are anymore. But my point that I'm trying to get to, and maybe a question that I'm trying to get to, is in the face of what we're talking about, permitted, controlled U.S. attorneys, courts, people that can pull off something of the caliber of these other events that we spoke of, I feel like, how do I put it? I feel like we should never give up our guns, but at the same time, what would it matter if we're never able to, you know, demand justice or do anything? I mean, I guess in the long run, if we never give up our guns, there's only so far they can push us.
Well, the guns have many uses, not just against the tyranny of government, but just home protection from criminals. And we've seen so many breakdowns in society. It's in many ways a fruit of multiculturalism. There's no longer a homogeneous population. There are many so-called minorities who have special rights. They can be offended. You can't speak about them, and so on. So if you had a general breakdown in social cohesion, guns are still a way for self-protection or family protection. Using them against the state, which is prepared to use any kind of weapons.
And they definitely have better ones.
They've got drones, and they can hit you with missiles from you don't know where. And on the other hand, the number of armed Americans is very large, and many tens of millions, and so just the size of that armed group, in the end, could serve as a constraint on tyrannical government that's putting people into camps or cutting off resources to them, water, power, food, whatever. So I think the guns still have the ability to limit what the government can do, at least at this current time they do.
Do you think that's perhaps, we see an ongoing erosion of basically every right, but do you think that's one of the reasons that you see these red flag laws coming up, or do you think that they could, be serving safety of the population?
I don't know.
Okay.
These are not things that are predictable.
For sure.
The world, like American propaganda, has basically put the whole world in the matrix. And most people, not just here, but all over the world, are influenced by the success of American propaganda. And they live in this propaganda, which is totally false, as if it's real. So the whole world is in a matrix. And the people who get out are the ones who are intelligent enough to notice it and can still get enough independent information independent of the propaganda, to figure it out and get a real understanding of the world. It's like the film, The Matrix. You take the blue pill or the red pill. And so these people tend to be defensive of the truth and to push it. And we do see gains in this. As I said, the Kennedy assassination report, the Warren Commission report, is no longer believed. Majority of the people don't believe the 9/11 Commission or the official story. And so you do have a situation where people are gradually emerging. But it's usually way, way behind the time. You see, the Kennedy assassination was more than 50 years ago. And so most of the people who were alive and there at the time, and know they're dead.
But then there's things like with 9/11, the results, like that receiving the Patriot Act on, thrust on the people and such. For real, you said there's some gains, and that's good to hear. Going into a new year, I'd like to believe that there's hopes and that we can progress and come to know. I think you brought up some good points there with information and coming to know what's really going on. But at the same time, there's these other questions about the propaganda machine and of how. Where were you going here with this one, Derrick?
Well, I wanted to just mention just a brief point on what you just said, Mr. Roberts, a moment ago about the matrix that we're in. I mean, definitely this is something we believe. This is why we do the content we do, whether it's radio programs, YouTube videos, passing out flyers, doing the different things we do to try to crack through and pull some more minds out of the matrix, if you will. And also, I don't know if I'm sure you did catch wind of this, but throughout 2018 and now going into 2019, we've seen a lot of censorship of that independent media. You said people need to seek out to find, kind of get to the truth of things. And, we're also seeing pushback in that area from what people would, they try to label these companies, say Facebook, Google, as private companies, but at best, they're quasi-private companies that take and have taken funding from U.S. governments and have connection to intelligence agencies. And their efforts to censor and to remove much of the independent and alternative media from the platforms, or just label us Russian fake news and then demonetize us, lower us in rankings and searches and all these kinds of things, what people call shadow banning. So it's it's become more obvious, I'd say, that we are in the midst of an information war. Whenever we saw some of the biggest pages on Facebook that have 4 million, 5 million followers and have been reaching hundreds of millions and millions and millions of people over the years, we saw them taken down. It really, I think, for some of us was a realization that, okay, well, the whatever label we want to give these people, deep state, Facebook, intelligence apparatus, whatever, they're pushing back. And the information war seemed a little bit more real. So I think that you're right that we do have to be able to pull people from the matrix, because whether it's 9/11, whether it's talking about red flag laws and guns, or just government becoming more intrusive, that they're showing their hand. And it maybe we'd like to believe that things are getting better here and there in different superficial ways, but it seems like the bigger picture is progressing in a way that is not towards freedom.
Well, of course, they can avoid First Amendment problems by relying on private companies to do the censorship, which is what they're doing. But you see, it's hard to know the outcome of this, because it becomes more apparent that they are controlling. And despite all of this, I don't know if you saw the results of the recent poll in Germany, where essentially the same percentage of Germans regard the United States as a direct threat to Germany as regards Russia a direct threat. So, of course, Russia is not a threat to Germany, but the propaganda is created in their minds that it is. But despite that, the same number of people regard the United States. It's the identical threat. I think in one case, the United States is seen by 56% of the people as a threat to Germany, and Russia by 57%. So given the margins of error, the 1% difference disappears. So we see things like that. We see also that finally the Russians no longer believe all the American propaganda. And the Chinese don't believe it any longer. And we see both of them arming to be able to take us out. And we see the Germans, for example, telling Washington, well, don't plan on putting any of your damn missiles in Germany. If you pull out the intermediate range nuclear agreement with Russia, you can take your missiles and cram them up your butt, but you're not going to put them in Germany. So we see these kinds of things happening. We see resistance to the centralization of Europe. The British voted to get out. We see now the Italian people have elected, a government that's half right-wing and half left-wing. But they agree, these two coalition partners agree that Italy mustn't lose its sovereignty to the EU. So we see all of these kinds of monstrous institutions that American propaganda has created over many decades coming into disrepute. And we see our longtime German vassal state. I mean, Germany has been a puppet of the United States since 1945. And they've never had a leader that represented Germany. They all represent Washington. This woman is an American agent. So she's now finished. The Germans are looking at the world differently. And it's despite all the propaganda, or perhaps the propaganda is what caused it. It just got too heavy we overreach too much. All of the sanctions Washington imposes are strictly illegal under international law. Only the UN, only a vote by the UN can impose sanctions. So Washington's habit of simply assuming that its law is universal, Washington's habit of arresting foreign nationals in other countries and bringing them in to the U.S. for show trials. I mean, this kind of just rank lawlessness has been noticed all over the world. And so it tends to break down the success of the propaganda. Now, still, though, of course, official stories don't change. And so the question is, how does the situation change? Well, I think it changes if the Germans actually do prevent the United States from putting missiles in Germany. I think it changes if the Chinese actually do defend their territorial waters and tell the U.S. Navy that, you come in here and your ships are going to sink. These things are what changed the world. And I think American power is evaporating. People don't believe us. They don't trust us. And we're swimming in debt. And what supports the American power system is the dollar as reserve currency. But Washington is destroying that. It destroys the dollar's reserve currency role with its sanctions, because the sanctions encourage other countries to find alternative currency to the dollar. They say, if we don't use the dollar, the sanctions can't touch us. If we don't use the American clearing systems, sanctions don't mean anything. It's just words issuing out of the mouth of a lunatic. So you see the movement then away from the use of the dollar in international transactions, and you see the shrinkage of American power, because why do they want our bonds?
For sure. I think
they don't need reserves if they don't use dollars. So these things can change. I think what it comes down to is that violence is ultimately
Dr. Roberts, I'd like to ask you a question. You've gone to speaking about economics and the dollar as the reserve currency of the world, and how that role's diminishing, and also how they brought a little bit of it onto themselves with the sanctions, which I really appreciate that, because I do feel like a lot of times these, I guess for lack of a better word, these dark moves, these bad moves they make do end up impugning themselves also, because I'd like to believe the person that does something on a simple basis wrong is also, kind of lowering themselves. So you have these people that are given great power and they're doing this sort of thing, and in the end we're left with the results. I think 64 is the last time we had 90% silver in the currency. Kennedy goes, they leave him, they put him on it right after he's gone, on the coin, on the $50, right? And in a way we're all left with these things. Like I said earlier, we were left with the Patriot Act. We're left with these things. We're left with this very limited average person understanding of what economics and money really is. So I kind of wanted to see if there was a way we could take some discussion, even briefly, about the role of information propaganda in economics. Like, not just in terms of global economics, but to your average American, boy and girl that's just growing up. They're growing up in the face of all this. And in the end, I feel like those people, for lack of a better word, are our people, not these shadow government people that are doing all this stuff, putting nuclear missiles everywhere and all this stuff. So back to my question. What do you think, we can do, or we should know, what can be done for these people in terms of economic information? And, do you believe there is such a thing as economic propaganda?
Of course, there's economic propaganda. You get it every month with the payroll jobs report. You get it with the inflation reports, the economic growth reports. It's all propaganda. In fact, the entirety of neoclassical economics, neoliberal economics, neoliberal economics is propaganda. It's propaganda that favors the financialization of the economy. The banks bought off the economics profession years ago. So, yes, it's propaganda. But you see, the question is, does it work? If you're a young person who's now got massive college debt, and you've come out of school and you expect to get a job, and you're living at home with your parents because you can't get a job that allows an independent existence. And then you read about, there's no inflation, there's economic growth, we've had all these jobs. It's a lie. If you've got 40 to 50%, I forget which it is, but it's at least 40% of Americans can't raise $400 cash. If you've got half the population or a third of whatever the figure is of people 25 years old or people 24 to 34 years old living at home with their parents because they can't support, the jobs won't support an independent existence, and you tell them all about the economic growth and the jobs and no inflation, they don't believe it.
Exactly. And I know some 20-something-year-olds would want to live with their parents still, but I don't believe your average one wants to. They want to have means and the ability to stand on their own. So I definitely appreciate you shedding some light on economic situation. What do you think? For example, I'm going to make this real brief, but we talked about that 9/11 case and the little bit of positive gain that could come, by opening the door a little bit more because a U.S. attorney wouldn't pursue such a thing on a conspiracy theory. Do you think there's anything analogous that could open the door a little bit on the economic understanding? Maybe not on making people richer, but letting people understand what economics really is in their life. You see what I'm saying?
Well, I think they do understand. I mean, the middle class is shrinking. A lot of them have been pushed out of the middle class. The hopes they had for their children's education have been frustrated. Everyone is aware that the rich are getting much richer and no one else is advancing at all. We've had just endless reports on the concentration of income upward, that fewer and fewer people own more and more and more, and the vast majority own less and less and less. So these things are all known. I think it's simply well known, that people know it. And I think they also know that the jobs are what jobs they are. They're either part-time, so there's no benefits of any sort and no career ladder from the part-time job.
For sure. You're definitely correct. People do know. I guess one, and maybe this is a side comment. What can be done? I mean, sometimes Derrick and I speak about spending money with the people. Maybe going to a farmer's market, things like that. And I know this is a little bit, it sounds trivial, right? So that's kind of where we're at. Like, how can we?
People are doing that anyhow, just because they want food that's not so badly adulterated.
Exactly. So we're getting kind of a double win there.
But still, it's expensive. And so if you're hard-pressed and you can't really afford to do that, you have to buy the cheap, worse stuff that you can find. But some people are changing their spending habits in order to eat more wholesome food. That happens. I don't think the question really is, what can we do? What can be done? Because the powers that be aren't going to let you. So I think in the end, it gets settled by violence. I think Marx is right, that violence is the effective force in history. And so either the people will get driven in the ground and give up, or they're going to get driven in the ground and fight. And I don't know which it'll be, but either the violence of the oligarchy will prevail or the violence of the people will prevail. But I don't think there's going to be any government that says, oh, look how bad the situation is. We've got to rectify it. We have to fix it. We have to do all these things to bring back the ladders of upward mobility and take away all this stuff that the rich have been able to construe in their interests. Nothing like that's going to happen. You're headed towards some form of decline, collapse, perhaps, violence. I mean, look at France. This yellow vest thing has been going on now for weeks, or is it months now? I can't. This goes on, and they don't give up.
Yeah, it's been a couple of months now. It's actually, we're going to get ready to wrap up, but that's where I wanted to take the conversation, Mr. Roberts, for just briefly to kind of touch on what's going on internationally. And as you said, we've seen the Yellow Vest movement spreading throughout France and into Belgium. I've seen other people posting about similar protests taking place across Europe. And then with that going on, we're also seeing, you'd kind of touched on this, the China trade war and countries starting to push back against the U.S. hegemony and starting to make deals for oil outside of the dollar, starting to deal in alternative currencies. And you've got the BRICS nations. And there's just a number of different geopolitical moves that are taking place that seem to signal a couple of changes, or at least, the appearance of this. I'm often skeptical that anything we see reported in the corporate media and, the show that we're being portrayed in front of us, that it's anything more than that, just a show. So sometimes I just have difficulty really truly believing some of the moves that are taking place. But on the surface, it does seem that China, as you said, and Russia and other nations are preparing for the U.S. to be in a decline and for the U.S. hegemony to come to a great shift, if not a complete end. And nations are pushing back what would appear to be globalism and to globalization. And some would say the France protests are an example of that, where people are upset not only about taxes, but generally there's a wide range of issues. And it doesn't seem to have been taken over by one sector of the political movement. Like, it's not just a right-wing protest. It's not just a left-wing protest. It genuinely seems to be people from across the board who are upset about a range of issues and who have found common ground. And of course, there's some more extreme elements who are out there in the streets and maybe fighting cops and, doing what I guess they feel is necessary. But my point here is, do you see this as part of a larger trend that we might see in 2019, whether it's the Yellow Vest movement or something else, just a larger awareness of pushing back against these mechanisms? And as you said, the United States seems to be headed towards, a decline. So that's my first question, is if you see that taking place, growing. But also, I just want to point to that before you give your answer, is that I've done a bit of research into looking into, and as I'm sure you are aware of, the division that the CIA has sown in nations abroad, and specifically I've read about British Guyana, the CIA working with the AFL-CIO and other unions down there to sow racial division and eventually to create protest and to try to overthrow the democratically elected leaders. And when I see the corporate media here in the United States and even some of the alternative media really pushing this message that we're on the brink of civil war, that people are completely divided, and it's not typically the reality I see in everyday life. Maybe at an Antifa versus Trump supporter protest or something, but it's just interesting to me that there is an obvious decline going on. There is an obvious power struggle going on, and I can see the polarization taking place, but I don't want to believe that this is genuine. And I also have evidence that says, hey, the CIA has done this in the past. Why wouldn't they do this in their own, whether it's the CIA or whoever, why wouldn't the deep state do this in their own country? Because we know they create order. They like to create order out of chaos. So your thoughts on that? Is this something globally that we can expect in 2019? And do you think the apparent division in the United States is genuine?
Look, in France, what they're protesting is that they have a government that doesn't represent French people. That's what they're protesting. And in Germany, there's been a lot of realization that Merkel didn't represent German people. She represented Washington's agenda. These kinds of developments are fundamental. And what comes out of it, we have to see. Whether these developments can be overwhelmed or whether they're going to prevail, I don't know. In the United States, there's no doubt that the media is a CIA asset, essentially a CIA asset. So with that being, and always has been to some extent, it's just now it's total. So the question really is, we've moved into the era of identity politics. Identity politics is a replacement of the Marxist emphasis on the conflict between capital and labor. That's all gone. The left wing no longer is a defender of the working class. The left wing sees the working class, and they're teaching everybody to see it. The Trump deplorables. This is an expression of identity politics in which the new exploiter is the white heterosexual male. He's now taken the place that the capitalist had in Marxism. And the victims are everybody else: women, homosexuals, blacks, transgender. These are all the victims of the white male. So what identity politics does is it busts up the population, puts it against one another, so there's no constraint on the government. There's no unity. When you had the left wing representing the working class, there was an offset to the capitalist power, the unions. They're gone. First, they offshored all the manufacturing jobs. So this essentially destroyed the financial basis of the unions and of the Democratic Party. So now we have the Democrats paid off by the same people that pay off the Republicans. So they don't really have any different interests. But the new ideology, it's identity politics. You see it everywhere. You see it in the universities. You see it in the media. Look, even now you can get black academics can get fired by CNN because they protested Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. Oh, that's a no-no. Israel somehow is a victim group. And the Palestinians are oppressors.
Yeah, they like to play that card. Israel loves to play the victim card.
It's not just Israel that plays it. Now everybody plays it. Women play it. Homosexuals play it. Transgenders play it. The so-called racial minorities, who are actually vast majorities worldwide. Whites are a tiny minority of the world population, on the verge of disappearance. But they are now in the role of the victimizer. They've taken the role of the capitalists in Marxism. And this is the politics of the Democratic Party. It is the total politics of the Democratic Party. It has been since the Clintons and Hillary. And so that's why the working class is now the Trump deplorables.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you as far as how identity politics has been used to divide. I'm from a younger generation than you. I'm 34 years old, and I have a younger brother at 21, and so I see between him and I, the difference between the two of our generations, and I've kind of planted seeds throughout his life, so I think he kind of sees some of these things too, and he sees his generation absorbed into technology, absorbed into being victims, and not really having kind of a entrepreneurial mindset, I guess you could say. And obviously there are exceptions to this, but the propaganda is strong. And I do think that one other big aspect, a big problem of the identity politics is it does create that us versus them. It creates this, this combative mentality from the outset, that there is this, and obviously there are true and real oppressors, and there are true and real oppressive actions. There are things that Europeans have done, there are things that Africans have done, there are things that the human race has done to each other, enslavement of all kinds of people, and I think there's a lot of trauma within the human race, and along come, whether you call it Marxist or whoever is willing to exploit this trauma, they can come along and say, hey, well, we have somebody to point the finger at. It's the Jews, it's the whites, it's the the capitalists, it's the different, and it's just another
this tribe, that tribe.
Exactly, it's tribal mentality and another way to create and stoke that division. And I do think, yeah, I want to hope and pray and believe, and personally I try to work to cultivate a community and have some connection to people who understand these things and who are maybe thinking a little bit ahead, planning for emergencies, whether that means a hurricane in Houston or something worse that we've been describing, so that I can, weather the storm, so to speak. But it is disheartening sometimes to look around and see what's taking place. And the last point, excuse me, go ahead.
Male, you can't weather the storm. You don't have any rights. See, only white males can commit hate crimes. Only white males can give offense. No white male can claim that he's a victim of a hate crime or that he's been offended by a black who said, kill all the whites. But if he says kill all the blacks, he's finished.
Yeah, we've seen that where they say there's those who argue that racism is only from whites or Europeans are the only ones who can be racist. Those with lighter skin compared to others. And personally,
which undermines the whole meaning of racism.
Well, it's part of their language games because they've changed the language. And I've definitely in my activism here in Houston we've worked with all kinds of people, and so we've had our conflicts with certain types. And it's the argument that racism is not only preferring one race over the other or something along those lines, but it's institutional power plus bigotry. So they they couple this new definition, and so because of that they argue, well, typically Europeans have been in power, they have been the elite class, so because of that anybody who is descended from those people or has the same color skin as them cannot be racist because they don't have power and they haven't historically had power.
They haven't been oppressed.
And for me, I'm half Mexican and I'm part Native, and those are the parts that I feel most close to. But even me being around others who might try to make these arguments, they're not sound arguments. They're not logical arguments. So it's not something that I buy into because it's just, again, it's part of the victim mentality. It's an easy way to cop out, and it's dangerous.
It's another example of, take the meaning and then you take the word. So now racism's meaning has been changed and the words, same thing with money, I mean, I feel, I think that's part of it, and that's why it's so insidious, and that's why I brought up the generational thing, because as you were brought with your brother, the generations after Kennedy, the generations that have, grown up under the Patriot Act and grown up with the war on terror, their whole thinking and being is different than the generations before.
Well, I'm going to go ahead. We're going to wrap up here. I know we kept you a little.
We're way over time.
Yeah, I know. I appreciate you staying long. I think people are going to enjoy this conversation, though. The last comment that I have, and just would love a comment from you. First off, everybody, please do check out paulcraigroberts.org to get all of his writing and just keep up with his work and his analysis. As you've seen in this interview, he has a lot to say and a lot to share. The last thing we'd love a comment from you is, what is the role that you see now after 2 years in office that Donald Trump is playing in all of the things that we just described? We've seen the administration support Israel and Saudi Arabia and a lot of different moves, and there's a lot of different takes on where Trump stands. So I'd love to get your take on this.
Well, Trump in his campaign declared two agendas. One was to normalize relations with Russia, which was a direct threat to the power and budget of the military security complex, the most powerful element in the United States. His second agenda was to bring the jobs home, which is a direct threat to the global corporations who have maximized their profits by sending the jobs offshore. So he immediately aligned against him two very powerful forces, the military security complex and global corporations. They immediately moved to make him impotent. This is where Russiagate came from. It was created by Brennan, the CIA director, kept alive by Comey and the Justice Department and Clapper, and they created this fiction that Trump was elected by Putin and they had a conspiracy to steal the election from the American people. And so what have we seen? Well, we've seen Trump under threat of indictment, impeachment for being a Russian agent, a Putin stooge, and so on and so on. And so where does he turn for support? The only place he can turn for support is Israel. He has a Jewish son-in-law. And so he says, well, these other powerful people are against me, but if the Israel lobby is on my side, I'll have a chance. So we get the Jerusalem thing and so on and so on. Now, on the jobs, he got bad advice and thought that the way you deal with the jobs is tariffs. But of course, that's not the way you deal with it. The tariffs aren't really falling on Chinese goods. They're falling on the products of Apple, Levi, Nike, all the American firms that have offshored. So he just makes a further enemy. The way you deal with offshoring of the jobs is you change the way you tax corporations. You tax them according to the geographical location of where they add value to their product. If they add value to their product domestically, the United States, they have a low tax rate. If they add value to their product in China and Indonesia and India, they have a high tax rate. And the tax rate can offset the advantage of the lower labor cost and nix the advantage of being there. But there's nobody to tell Trump that. He hasn't got anybody. He's got the same people that Obama had, that George W. Bush had, that Clinton had. They're all the same. I said at the beginning, the trouble with Trump is he doesn't know who to appoint that will support him. And the two people who appeared ready to do that, General Flynn was quickly removed for that very reason, that he was going to support Trump, and the fellow Brannon. So both of them are gone. So Trump is surrounded by his enemies. We now have Bolton, the National Security Advisor, the most extreme of all the neoconservatives. The last person on earth is going to allow any diminution of the power of the military security complex, and he's now in charge of our foreign policy. So Trump has essentially been neutered. And it's even worse because Trump's worst sin against the establishment was appealing to the people. He said, elect me, and I'll bring the establishment into line. We'll overcome them. And so they're going to make an example out of Trump so no president ever again in future dares to appeal to the American people. So that's the situation with Trump. It's clear today. I don't even think it's subject to debate.
I have a little bit trouble with some of that analysis, but overall I do think that I come to a similar conclusion that, Trump is impotent to make any different change. But I would argue that, Trump is, like you said, the same people, the Obama people, the neocons they haven't gone anywhere. But unless somebody is, making Trump's decisions for him, Trump himself appointed people like John Bolton, and he knows John Bolton's history for calling for war with Iran and working with the Bush administration. And, Bolton saying that, he'll be celebrating in Tehran in 2019 while he's talking to the MEK. And, I just feel like it's whether Trump is a useful idiot or just got himself trapped because he's surrounded by people who can't help him. The agenda is moving forward one way or the other. The results are the same, and what I've seen is 2020, whether Trump wins or not, there's going to be, of course, the Democratic challenger to come save the day, probably a young Beto O'Rourke or something like that. And it's just the same old thing. You got to have one person to be the real bad guy. And I actually wrote an article in 2016 right after Trump got elected where I was calling Trump, from what I saw, that the fake news was going to be used to attack the independent media, to label anything that they didn't agree with fake news, to go after Russia. And essentially from my take on it is that Trump is playing the role of the great divider, where the media obsesses about him and they make all kinds of money about it, and they analyze every tweet he makes and every offensive thing that he says, and people get in a big uproar and they're all upset, and so that stokes the left and kind of gets them excited like they need to do something.
Look, just a minute. There's not a left.
Well, the
The
appearance
left
of the
is
left, the
pro-war.
Democrats.
The left is pro-war.
They're all pro-war, absolutely, and Trump has continued the war. And I guess that's kind of what I'm saying is like Trump's already dropped more bombs than Obama, and of course Obama dropped more than Bush, and it just seems to be, you know, whether it's because he came in and he really thought that he could do something different, and now it's just too late, or it was another swoop in and say, here, you know, hope and change, make America great.
I think the mistake you're making is you think the president's in charge.
Oh, no, I mean, I know he's a figurehead, but that's what I'm saying is that they brought in another figurehead to play this role.
No, they did not bring him in.
I don't think anybody can win the presidency without having had that talk to them.
He appealed to the people, and they elected him. And
So you believe the elections are real?
it surprised the hell out of everybody.
Do you believe the elections are real?
This election was real. They elected Trump.
Why would this one be any more real than any other ones? I mean, I know that you know, and I've heard you talk about this before, and I'm respectfully saying that you've talked about how controlled the system is. We understand how controlled the media is, and all of a sudden the media comes along and says, hate this guy. This is the worst person you've ever seen.
Look, I think you're missing the point. They lost control of the Republican nominee.
I think that's a part of the narrative, personally.
Yeah. He took the thing away from them. He got elected by the people. If you could have gone through all of the lower class areas, all of where poor people were, they all had Trump signs. Trump was actually elected by the working class, which traditionally, except when they elected Reagan, had voted Democrat. And so this is the threat that Trump represented to the system. As I said, is an even bigger threat than he represented to the military security complex and to the global corporations. He actually had appealed to the people and said, we're going to turn this over. We're going to turn it around. Go back and look at his speech at his inauguration. Look at what he said. Things change right now. This is the end of them. The establishment's dead. So they're going to make an example of him so that any future maverick doesn't get the idea of appealing to the people and thinking that he can use the support of the people to challenge the system. That's what Trump tries to do with all his Twitter tweets. He tries to keep his support alive because it's the only support he's got. But you see, it's not an organized form of power. So he is at this kind of disadvantage. So it's most certainly the case he was not chosen by the establishment to be the candidate, or much less to be the president. If they chose him to be the president, why in the world would they be trying to destroy him?
I think it's a faux resistance that they're creating. But we'll just have to leave it there. I know we've gone over time.
It's a faux resistance when you're calling the president of the United States a Russian, a traitor.
Well, it serves multiple purposes. It brings back.
They call for his death.
It brings back the Russian hysteria. It allows for more of that division, and then I think overall, when you really look at Trump's actions, that it still is serving the agenda that we've seen going on for years. That it's serving the Zionist agenda. It's continuing the relationships with Saudi Arabia. He's not looking into 9/11. Before when he ran, he mentioned, ISIS was created by the CIA. Look into 9/11. You'll see about this. And the Federal Reserve this. And he's had plenty of opportunity since then. He could even talk about what we just mentioned. That
he did get us out of Yemen, and he's saying he's going to get us out of Syria.
He's saying he's going to get us out of Syria, but meanwhile, as soon as that announcement was dropped this last weekend, more bombs were dropped. Once
again, you assume he's in control.
Well, yes, there are people...
You're making the same mistake Trump made.
Well, I agree with you on that. He definitely is not the only one in control, but
didn't he?
He makes appointments. Does he not make his own appointments?
Shouldn't we hold him to some degree of responsibility?
Yeah, I just feel like in the past.
How does he make his own appointments? He doesn't know who the players are, what the issues are, who would support him and doesn't support him. He knows nothing about it. He's in entertainment business, the real estate business.
Exactly, and he's playing a reality show star on the biggest reality show ever, the United States of America, President of America. It's the biggest reality show we've ever seen play out in front of our eyes. I mean, that's my take on it.
You're totally right.
Well, I appreciate your time, though. We definitely are thankful for the conversation.
I think that you brought up so many good points all through the conversation. It knitted together really well. Different themes came out in each segment. I do appreciate your time. And I think you also brought up in the end here, even with some disagreement on view with Derrick, the importance of go and look, go read this, and the ability to have a dialogue and have differences is so important in this time, especially because we already see the assault on the First Amendment, as we all know. We see it everywhere. So these dialogues, you taking the time to come on and talk here on Freethinker Radio, KPFT Houston, is you're going. I feel like these ideas on this station are going to reach people that traditionally maybe not hear these. So thanks again, Dr. Roberts.
Okay, good to you both.